Hello, hello, how are you? Welcome back to Life Trials by EAC with your favorite political analyst and model and all those amazing things. How y'all doing today? Thank you again for joining me on this beautiful Saturday afternoon here on the east coast of Florida. It is 11:15 a.m. Oh, Jesus. And we're just going to jump right in, all right? So has anybody been wondering what has happened since January 6th and, what has occurred since the so-called insurrection, right? Because I'm dying to know. So without further ado, in today's episode, I wanted to bring to you guys the daily debacle of today's political news, and more specifically to discuss what has happened since January 6th, right? And the events that have unfolded since then. So the time frame of these events first started with the January 6th event, then the impeachment, and then the inauguration. And as of today, we still have a full political persecution of those who were at the Capitol that day, whether they entered or not. And we need to discuss that more in depth. So we're just going to fucking jump right in right here. So I obviously want to ensue this discussion about the so-called insurrection day that's, happened on January 6, 2021. Former President Donald J. Trump, we miss you, attended a rally being held in part to contest the 2020 presidential election. And he told his supporters, upon which I am paraphrasing, that included all fractions of the Republican Party needed to make their voices heard and go over to Capitol Hill during the congressional session that was being held at that moment to affirm and finalize the 2020 election. And he had asked them to then leave peacefully. However, such events took a different route when the extremists of his party ended up storming the Capitol, causing massive disruption, whatever. Ultimately, this led to the House of Representatives to implement the amendment to remove the former President Donald J. Trump days before the inauguration of the new president that we have today that has completely destroyed our country. So after such events, both the public and private sector felt the need to make their impact on where they stand with respect to where their donations will go and how to oust those upon which they believe disagreed with the outcome of the last presidential election. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter permanently banned such a public figure, even though there was no actual evidence pre-planning on behalf of the previous president to incite such violence that occurred that day. Massive amounts of companies like Marriott removed all donations from Republican politicians and will not support those upon which they see fit or what they perceive to be politically correct. And what that begs the question of how far we are willing to take this censorship of those who may or may not feel that this was an insurrection or not, or who believe that the 2020 election was rigged or not. These companies are telling these politicians that if you do not obey by woke culture, you're out. That jumps into my next segment here about censorship that followed from the insurrection of Capitol Hill. The censorship of the former president to remove him entirely from the existence of our political arena is a dangerous precedent to set for such political So the censorship of the former president to remove him entirely from the existence of our political arena is a dangerous precedent to set for the future of our democracy. We cannot allow for such political censorship to dominate our sense of political discourse at all. We need to be able to freely converse with those who have differing political beliefs in order to sustain mutual respect without resorting to censoring or violence or political violence in order to make such a stance on political issues. I thought we knew that. I thought we were all adults, but I guess not. We cannot allow for the Constitution to be made a mockery, and we need to stand up against such political censorship of our supposed political enemies, opponents, whatever. It doesn't matter. We cannot allow for the censorship of those that we disagree with politically. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent to set. And the fight for free speech in our pursuit to fully protect the First Amendment, we must start to allow for such discourse to freely occur. Allowing for such tech giants to shut down methods of communication is a dangerous road to take, regardless of how ugly the user or communicator of such information may be. We must fight against such insurgencies, the hindrance of the ability for people to speak out against such censorship. And as somebody that has personally experienced censorship, I think it is profound and will always be at the detriment of our democracy and the growth of the American dream if we do not protect our right to free speech and to engage in discussions freely without fear of intimidation, without fear of coercion, extortion, or legal threats. So what I found interesting was that as of today is August 28, 2021. It's been about almost 9 months since the so-called insurrection. And what I found was that the FBI has yet to come up, and they've pretty much come up empty-handed in its search for the January 6th plot. Like, who's the one that, like, started this, right? So I read this extremely intriguing article from The Hill by a constitutional scholar known as Jonathan Turley, which his political views are very liberal. Just to put that out there, and just to remind my viewers, I do conduct such research, and I always find from both sides, regardless of the political party. I do like to give a more moderate assessment of political issues. However, I've never lied about where I stand, politically speaking. A lot of people know I am a conservative. Okay, perfect. I'm so glad we cleared that out again. And that is exactly who is this specific individual that I read who wrote this article. He is a constitutional scholar. I really enjoyed reading this specific article because he first starts out with issuing this analogy about how addressing specific issues head on requires honesty, accountability, transparency with addressing these, specific given political issues, right? And he uses the analogy to discuss what has happened since January 6th and how the political issue has been spun on its head. He further elaborates on how, for politicians, labeling controversies is often more important than addressing the controversies themselves, and the same is true with respect to labeling political violence. He equates how the Black Lives Matter rioting and other groups that turned extremely violent last summer because of the George Floyd death, and he even discusses how some media employees were expressly told to not refer to those specific political acts of violence as rioters, but rather protesters, as the rioters were causing massive property damage. I remember everybody saw that specific CNN reporter that was at a specific riot last summer, and he had described the fury as just, this is fury, but mostly peaceful. And we all remember what we saw in the back of what was happening behind him. It was a horrifying riot. The insane destruction of property. The challenges for law enforcement last summer were really scary, like extremely scary. And this was all caused by the George Floyd death, right? But you didn't see, after the loss of the last election, you didn't see Republicans or Trump supporters or anything like that going into the streets, causing riots, destroying property. They didn't do any of that. They did none of that. None of that. And it's interesting because conversely, the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill cannot be just a riot, let alone, according to that, sector of politics, which is the left, it can't be a fury protest, but only an insurrection. And many in the media continue as of today referring to the insurrectionists as insurrectionists versus considering them rioters. Even NPR ran an entire account called Capitol Insurrection, which was obviously to further drive this narrative. And that's where the House Democrats picked up on this narrative, and they really have pushed for it. And this, when they were impeaching the former president for supposedly inciting this, insurrection, despite undermining any chance for an actual conviction which they got none in both times that they tried to impeach the guy, in which I find very scary that you have members of Congress, such as the House of Representative Eric Swalwell, who has been caught having sexual relations with the enemy, right? And this guy has still not been removed from his committee obligations and jobs and whatever. He has compromised national security. And you have this bum still in federal court as of today claiming a conspiracy theory of armed and organized insurrectionists, even though there was not a person there that day with a firearm ready to take out anybody. But you have that bum. I don't even know how he's still in office, man. That's how corrupt the liberals are, okay? So the article further elaborates on the characterization of the attack as an insurrection served as only for political and personal purposes, which it first painted anyone associated with challenging the 2020 election results as supporting sedition and the country's overthrow. Secondary, if this was a protest allowed to be turned into a riot, there will be more questions about the failure to properly protect the Capitol, which is the issue at hand here. But it's obviously easier to excuse a response to that supposed insurrection than, a violent protest. And that specific point was expressly made by a former U.S. Capitol Police chief who insisted that this was not a demonstration and that this was not a failure to plan properly, but that this was a planned, coordinated attack on the United States Capitol, even though they knew there was going to be a riot to some capacity with that large amount of people. And it's an unfortunate situation that they refuse to take any accountability for the fact that they failed to plan accordingly. But of course, they're deflecting the sense of responsibility. So as of today, there is still this sense of a full political persecution of those involved, which apparently has led for the FBI to fall short on convictions with respects to this so-called, insurrection that supposedly happened, So despite the fact that they have termed this specific problem as an insurrection, according to Reuters, they disclosed, the FBI had disclosed to them that they have an apparent struggle to account or find a coordinated insurrection plot for January 6th. And they continue to discuss detail that despite months of intense investigations, they could not find much evidence of any organized plot and instead found that virtually all of the cases are one-offs. One agent explained 90 to 95% of those that are one-off cases are just issues of trespass, right? And maybe you have about 5% of those that are considered coordinated with militia groups that were more closely organized, but there was no grand scheme as what the mainstream media continues to narrate and continues to push this, narrative about this grand scheme with Roger Stone and Alex Jones, and that these people were going to storm the Capitol and take hostages, as the media continues to claim, as the reasoning of why January 6th happened. So in other words, they found a protest that became a runaway riot as insufficient security preparations quickly collapsed, while they were clearly those that were obviously trying to set up a plot to just trash the Capitol. Most people were just show milling, and they were in the hallways taking selfies, actively describing the scene on social media. And there were more than 570 people that had been arrested, but only 40 faced conspiracy charges. And of those charges, which are often based on prior discussions about trying to enter, the Capitol grounds, or bringing material to use in the riots. Some clearly came prepared for rioting with ropes, chemical irritants, and other materials. Those cases, however, are a very small, minuscule fraction amongst those tens of thousands of protesters on that given day. Even after 5 months of malicious illegal arrests nationwide, a few reporters have noted that no one was actually charged. These people do not even have the decency, the mainstream media, them knowing the information at hand, that they know this information, because the FBI obviously relays a lot of information to these, mainstream media outlets, that no one was actually charged with an insurrection or a sedition. And the vast majority of people face charges such as simple trespass. For example, the latest guilty plea is from this San Francisco real estate broker, Jennifer Ryan, who posted on social media of a simple suggestion that they were just going to go down and storm the Capitol. Literally, because of that, she had to plead guilty this week to parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building, and faces a maximum sentence of 6 months in prison and a fine of $5,000. Yet the characterization of the insurrection has continued as a virtual article of fate for those reporting on or writing about January 6th. It is disgusting. It's despicable. You're destroying the lives of people. I have read other articles that there has been these attorneys that are representing these individuals, because obviously this is being conducted in federal court in the territory of, DC. So you have like people like this woman from San Francisco that has to, hire an attorney from DC, whatever. There has been reports that as a way to remediate their issues, you've had judges and attorneys coming together and suggesting some type of remedial action that their clients can take. And you want to know what that is? Political cleansing. That's what they're trying to do, is politically cleanse those that supported Donald Trump. And that's what you saw after January 6th, is mainstream media reporters suggesting that these people needed to be like put into some institution, they needed to be cleansed of some sort, and it's really scary. It just continues to be declared on television that this is obviously this is a political agenda issue that needs to be pushed at any given cost. It's extremely dangerous and sets a very bad precedent for the justice system and the due process of our amazing country. Remember, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, website, and all the platforms that are hosting Live Trials by AC. So please also consider supporting me on my website, @elizabethcharnay.com, as any donation for me is enormously appreciated to keep this podcast up and running. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Live Trials by EAC with yours truly. I love you guys so much. Bye. Bye-bye.